Well, it's obviously Limerick's world and we're just living in it. If you want to celebrate that yesterday, if you want to give out about something, we're here for you today. 087 9180 180. But we're obviously going to be luxuriating in the greatness of this Limerick hurling team. Where are we in the cycle? Are we at the start of the cycle? Are we at the middle of the cycle? Is this the beginning of a long period of domination? What's going to happen? Give us your thoughts on that. Give us your thoughts on how Cork set up yesterday. We'll get into this with James Scale just after 8 o'clock, and obviously they're going to feature heavily on the performance rankings, which are imminent. 087 180 180 is the WhatsApp number. It's Jern on with you all the way through until 10 this morning. What did you make of that, Owen?
It was incredible, absolutely incredible. It was up there with some of the great big performances in a big match from a sporting team ever, really. The initial thought I had at half-time was that this was Hurling's version of that Barcelona win against Manchester United in the 2011 Champions League final, when Pep Guardiola's masterpiece was in full display and operating at its highest level. Alex Ferguson after the game said that we've never seen a team like this, and we were powerless to stop them. And I felt that Kieran Kingston was probably in a similar position, where there was a sense of helplessness in that dressing room, but also a sense of admiration at what this team were doing. It is right up there with Kilkenny's performance against Waterford in 2008, and to be honest with you, it has probably surpassed it. It will be very interesting now over the next little while to see how significant 2019 ends up being in the run on this Limerick team. Will that be the thing that actually stops the 5 in a row from happening, or actually will it be an insignificant footnote, and are we actually in the middle of a 5 in a row right now anyway?
Is that the Donegal game for the Dubs? That's the point, I suppose, isn't it? Like,
Correct,
and
yeah.
I suppose with you brought up the Waterford game, people were comparing this match from Kilkenny's run to that level of performance. But what if this isn't the Waterford game? What if this is the Limerick game the year before, where Kilkenny blitzed Limerick in the first half, didn't quite put up that score, and they were still cresting. So maybe the peak of this Limerick team is coming next year. The other thing I think about where Limerick are at the moment is, if you go through the other contenders, how many of them can you make a case for in 12 months' time? Conor McKeown made a great piece. I mentioned this in the show last week. Made a great point about Dublin and Mayo. 2 years ago, after Dublin completely annihilated Mayo, if you had said that Mayo were going to beat them in a championship match, people would have said you were doting. So it's not beyond the bounds of possibility that Cork can come back for this and win. You just would say it's very unlikely that they're going to be able to turn that round next year. Maybe the year after, when the under-20s, who were so impressive during the week, they go from 19 to 21, they go from 20 to 22, and they're backboning that team or they're the ones who are driving standards and training because of the competition. Maybe in 2 years' time, this Limerick team will come off the peak, and that's when we see it. But look at the contenders for next year. So Tipperary need a new manager, Wexford need a new manager. Is it possible that Waterford need a new manager? In fairness, if Waterford do need a new manager, that's because their manager's gone to Tipperary and suddenly he's so good that you would think, right, that's going to keep them at a level that they were at this year. And bear in mind, in the first half, they were so sensational against Limerick that we were like, wow, what's the story of this Limerick team? And Limerick needed an all-time great second half performance to beat them. But they seem to have roused the beast. So that's those three. Kilkenny definitely a team in transition, with their, the end of their great team finally coming through. Cork scarred at least next year. Galway, it's hard to know what the truth about Galway is, because certainly they have gone toe to toe with this Limerick team, and that's a while ago now. After that, am I missing anybody?
Well, you're missing Wexford and Clare.
Clare, I'd like to see Clare next year in the heat in an All-Ireland semi-final. So once the Munster games, the Munster round robin is over next year, which, assuming that comes back, let's see that game in Cork and see exactly how that goes. I'm not saying that there's an uncertainty of outcome. You'd still make Limerick 6 to 8 point favourites at the moment, but hurling is definitely outside of Limerick in a state of uncertainty. I didn't include the Dubs there. Obviously, I don't think they're at that level just yet. But again, in 2 years' time, can they put it up to them? Are we shooing Limerick in for next year's All Ireland as well?
I'd always be very wary of ever doing that, of shooing a team in for an All-Ireland. Even within a year, there have been times when that Dublin team looked totally unstoppable, and in fairness, they were unstoppable for 6 years, but they still got a game in a final in years when we expected them not to get that. Limerick kind of looked like that now. They did something that Dublin have never really done, which is completely pulverise an opponent in an All-Ireland final. I really don't think we've seen a team do that in either coast since Kilkenny in 2008. So that is something that they have, and that is something you can point to and say, well, this is why they're going to dominate next year. I think the tip situation that you mentioned there, you can look at that both ways. You can say, well, there's a little bit of a blueprint for how you can upset Limerick, but in reality what it was that Limerick had a tiny bit of a hiccup for a section of a game, and that's why that game looked like it was maybe not going to go their way entirely. But it's hard to argue against your point that the rest of hurling is in a little bit of a state of chaos. I'm just very wary of writing everybody else off just yet, because there are so many other well-resourced counties with great young players. Next year might be too soon for Cork, but Cork will come, and this Cork team that is going to come through over the next little while will backbone a new Cork that will be good enough to take on a team like Limerick and win All Ireland. I'm absolutely convinced of that. The questions really within Cork, and we'll get into this, into the performance rankings, really surround this current crop, this current management, this current set of players. Next year, the pressure is on this Cork team to prove that those players who are still going to be young enough to play over the next 5 years, the management who will still be eager enough to manage for the next however many years, that they are all up to the task, because there is a golden generation coming through and you cannot screw this up. Limerick have shown the blueprint, and the Dubs were the same. When one golden group of players comes through, if you manage to not screw that up, you can do incredibly special things. And yes, both of those two teams that we discuss have huge advantages when it comes to finance and maybe even population to a certain degree, to a lesser degree for Limerick and Dublin, obviously, but they were still massively reliant on one underage team that was better than all the rest. We're talking about that 2011 minor team for Dublin, which in fairness lost the All-Ireland final, but won the 21s in 2014. The Limerick teams at under 21 level from 15 and 17, it is still two golden generations that we're talking about that backboned this team, and all the resources do help. Of course they do. They make the dice roll in your favour to a certain degree, but it's about not screwing up a golden generation when they arrive, and Limerick have maximised an incredible bunch of players.
I think that we've come to think of that Dublin 5 in a row, 6 in a row team as one team, but they're not. That generation that you're talking about, they're the cavalry for the first group who wins the All-Ireland and gets them over the line for the first time. That has Paul Flynn and Connolly and Philly and that group
Brogan.
of players and the Brogans. Yeah, exactly. Like,
it is a completely different team. The 5 in a row Dublin team is different to the initial charge from Dublin, which is your 11 and 13. It coincides with a change in play, the Donegal moment. So you have an amazing manager who is a genius and knows what to do when things start to go wrong, allied with McCaffrey, Fenton, Kilkenny, even players like Cormac Costello, who was on that minor team, Mannion, who was on that minor and under-21 team. Those players are then suddenly coming to a level where they can really impact senior football. And it's just a beautiful marriage of things that resulted in Dublin going on to dominate. It was a reason why Dublin went on to dominate for so long. And Limerick have pretty much the exact same thing. You go back and you look at that 2015 under-21 All-Ireland winning team, and it is basically, if you didn't make the senior level, you were in the minority, and they've come through so spectacularly. So that's why I would give Cork hope, given the week that they've had. Anthony Daly making the point in the Irish Examiner this morning that the minor team that won the All-Ireland on Saturday night is one of the best minor teams he has ever seen, and there is massive hype about the 20s team as well. We know that Cork have started to do things in a way that Limerick have done for the last 10 years in terms of tapping into the resources in the city and in the schools. This will come to fruition eventually, so that is why I'm just a little bit cautious of saying that Limerick are definitely going to dominate for the next few years. No question.
How long though? So
yeah, okay, I think they'll win next year. I definitely think they'll win next year. I do think 2023, I do think we could see a 2-year turnaround from Cork where they could win the All-Ireland, because again, if you want to keep these Dublin comparisons going, let's not forget where Dublin were 2 years before they won the All-Ireland in 2011. Absolutely hockeyed off the field in an All-Ireland quarter-final, and they beat that exact same opposition to win the 2011 decider. Okay, the opposition they beat in that 2011 decider, Kerry, are nowhere near what this Limerick team are in terms of professionalism, in terms of the route that they've taken to dominate their sport. But there is evidence in the past in Gaelic games of a team turning things around pretty quickly if they have the right systems in place, and that is one of the questions that Cork need to ask themselves over the next couple of years.
The age profile of the 2009 team versus the 2011 team for Kerry, though, is the thing here.
True.
Like, the age profile of this Limerick team is still very, very good.
Exactly.
And sorry, the cheat code is the coaching and the management, right? That's the bit that gets them, like. And we'll get into this with James Gale like, what is it that Connacht does, and what is it that Connacht brings, and what is it that the speed of thought that they have? How much of that was down to Cork freezing yesterday? I don't know. That's the other unknowable thing here, is like, how bad did Cork play? How much of that was down to the pressure that Limerick put them under, but how much of it was down to the fact that they're still not quite sure of their own identity? Like, we talked increasingly in the build-up about how Cork were still working their way through games and how they were flaky within matches. In the All-Ireland semi-final, Kilkenny were dominating them for a period of time, and if Kilkenny had been a bit more ruthless, could have put them away. And then they were absolutely unstoppable for a period in that second half where they just went on a run. So that flakiness was there, and Limerick capitalised on it. As soon as they were in any way ponderous or made mistakes, Limerick completely annihilated them. Like, it's the 13th minute, I think, Cork score a point, and it's like, oh, this is going to be good. It's like, it's back to 3 points here. Cork just need to, manage this. And then long puck out, catch, ball into full forward line, pass to Gillette, totally free. And everybody was free. Everybody was completely unmolested from the puck out the whole way, length of the field. How do they manufacture that space? Is that a brain fart, or is it genius? And over the winter, all of the best coaching minds in the game are going to be looking at that footage going, how did this happen? Is it just because Cork froze and didn't have a defensive structure and defensive plan that was fit for purpose on the day? Or is it that Limerick are operating at such a high level? I don't know. There was an anarchiness about Limerick in the second half that maybe just give you a little pause for concern. Just you think back to the season as it was, and the brawls that were happening in the league matches earlier in the year, they weren't important. People were getting red carded, but there was definitely a little bit of niggle in that team that makes you think perhaps there's something there, that some team is going to be able to get under their skin at some point next year. But like, you're clutching at straws here to try and see somebody who can live with what we saw yesterday, which was a signature performance from the team. And when the story comes to be written about this great Limerick team, the one-sided nature of that victory and how easy it was for them to beat one of the superpowers of hurling, to humiliate Cork in the way that they did yesterday. I know you're saying it's easy for teams, or not easy for teams, but teams have come back from stuff like this. Like, that's a ritual humiliation that Cork have suffered. So is there scar tissue?
There probably will be. It will take amazing work from their sports psychology unit over the course of the winter to actually ensure that this does turn into a positive, rather than just allow them to have some sort of PTSD over the next little while. Like, the one thing about this is that, okay, they probably are they a better team than Waterford were in 2008? They probably are, but their performance yesterday and the way they got out of it was maybe with a little bit more credit in the bank than, say, Waterford did in 2008. So if you're going to be on the receiving end of one of these signature performances, like, they do put up 122. Like, I know you're talking about those moments early in the game. Like, they got out into the first water break with 1-6 in the bank, which is not a bad opening tally. But the problem is Limerick had also ripped them asunder. But like 122, like, just looking back through the All-Irelands of the last 10 years, on only 2 occasions have the losing team in the final scored more than that. Now, judging what a losing team scores is a pretty irrelevant statistic, but it
was game over, though. I think I definitely don't think there's any merit in analysing the second half in some ways, because it's literally game over at that point. And Cork didn't do themselves any favour by going for goals straight from the start of the second half, because at that point Limerick are like, okay, grand, we thought maybe you would come with something, but actually, if it's pot shots and over carrying into our defence, have at it, lads. And I also think there were times when Keane Lynch tapped one over at one point, as opposed to there's one more pass for goal. They were, I think, in the second half, Limerick were taking it easy on Cork.
Yeah, like I maybe there was definitely that feel that they had taken the foot off the pedal in the third quarter, maybe. But if you want to talk about that edge that Limerick have, like, I think it's something we should definitely mention, because that was as interesting as anything else that happened in the second half, when there was that little bit of a melee. It was a definite melee. It was like I actually thought it was going to spill over into something quite significant, because it just kept going and going and going. And there was a number of like different little moments in there where probably learned a bit about Limerick. Like, Graham Mulcahy snapping a fella's hurley, for me, is the one that stuck out. It's not something that I've seen before. Just looking through Twitter, people who would have a lot more hurling in their blood apparently have seen that thing happen before on the pitch. And I thought that was like, wow, you're 15 points up and you are snapping an opponent's hurley to try and stop an advantage. I'm like, I mean, there is a serious edge that Limerick have, and that you obviously need to win in All-Ireland. And I just wonder, like you say there, could it be something that the opponents tap into over the next little while? Maybe it can be, but it's something that Limerick are definitely using to their advantage at the moment. You don't really mess with them, and they're the aggressor in these sort of situations.
All right. OTB AM is brought to you by Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette. Put your best face forward with their new and improved razors. Here's what's coming up between now and 10 o'clock. James Scales is going to join us at 10 past 8. We'll do our performance rankings right now. We've got Sarah Donovan at 8:40. We've got Limerick Reaction at 8:50. We have Ronaldinho's buddy Paul Walsh at 9 o'clock. Mark Lawrenson at 10 past 9. To look back on a pretty interesting weekend of Premier League action, which might have flown under the radar for those of you who were consumed by the All-Ireland Hurling final yesterday, and more reaction from the weekend coming your way at 9:30 as well. At 7:46 this morning, it is time for the performance rankings.
You know, that wasn't an All-Ireland winning performance.
Probably should have won the game based on their second half performance.
Is it a step too far to say it was the performance so far of the World Cup? Maybe not.
OTB AM's performance rankings with Gillette.
I'm scratching my head. That performance was just lacked that intensity.
Boom.
No prizes for guessing where we're starting in the red this morning. It's going to be with the Cork hurlers, unfortunately. We're going to get into the Nice fans as well before we're done with the bad, and then we're going to get into the hurling championship as a whole, which is probably in amber and probably in a grand place, which we'll get into, and then Shane Duffy and Limerick in the green. So Kieran Kingston, after the game yesterday, described this as like trying to stop a tide with a bucket, and he's not wrong. It's a good quote. There's just a number of different things that you could touch on with regards to how this Cork performance broke down. For me, I think it was laid bare in that full back line on both sides of the ball. First of all, the amount of space that the Limerick hurlers had, which isn't necessarily the full back line's fault, but it certainly created the conditions for them to get torn apart. And yes, of course, you'd like for better one-on-one defending from your full back line at inter-county level, but the conditions were there for them to get totally destroyed. But secondly, when they were in possession, they really looked like the occasion was getting to them. The short puck out completely broke down because it seemed that their first touch had completely broke down. And I'm not sure what you even do if you're in Cork's position at that point. How do you deal with not a systems failure, but a skills failure at certain points in the game? Yes, Limerick were amazing, and this is mostly about Limerick, but there were some moments in that first half. After a good first quarter from Cork, we were like, God, things have completely shattered inside themselves here. And I think that is a big part of how Limerick managed to rack up such a gigantic score.
I think that it's a complete systems failure, and it'll be very interesting to hear what the analysis is like as people start to parse the video and work out the stats. The Limerick's success on their own puck out was phenomenal. The rate of success and just how effective it was in. They could go short, they could go long, and it seemed to work almost all the time. And let's face it, if you're going to win an All-Ireland against a great team, you need absolutely everything to go well. You need to put them under pressure. It's funny because in the first 15 minutes, actually, there were a few bits where there was a few Limerick lads being hounded, and there was 2 or 3 Cork players together. But what would happen is, whenever there was a mistake made, or whenever there was a little bit of pressure felt, a score would happen. A Limerick score would happen. And so Limerick are obviously able to deal with whatever was happening, and that just, you saw the confidence drain out of Cork. Cork tried a few long balls into the Limerick full back line in the first 15 minutes as well, and every single time somebody from the Limerick full back line came out with the ball fairly easily, it was like, well, that's not working. What other plans do we have? Oh, look, they've scored another goal. I don't know. I think it's definitely, you can see the full back line being exposed, but the full forward line or whoever is supposed to put the press on, that, you know, there's supposed to be a reason for that, and it didn't work.
Yeah, and like it was definitely very noticeable as well that if you look at the other full back line, which was Limerick, so they were just gobbling up Cork, and Route 1 then had to be an option for Cork because their plan B wasn't working either, but that Route 1 was just never going to work the way Limerick were playing. One of the interesting moments for me in the first half, and I can't remember who got the score here, but it was like when Robbie O'Flynn burst through like a bit of a pinball, and he bounced off about 4 or 5 different Limerick men, eventually managed to hand pass the ball back to his teammate, and the ball is put over the bar. And I was like, Robbie O'Flynn right now, for earning an assist, has just been through the ringer, and he is absolutely shattered. He has managed to somehow hold on to possession. It was an incredible bit of play, and they've managed to get a point out of it. And I was like, that is the level Cork need to get to in order to create a point-scoring opportunity in this game.
So I'm just looking at the Examiner here. I'm almost certain that Jack O'Connor scores that, and that makes it a one-point game, and that's 1-5 to 1-4. And you're thinking, right, they're in this now, and look, they're fighting for everything. It's that puck out that leads to the Galan goal. So as soon as that happens, and I think you're dead right. It's like, in a way, that's the end of the game, because that's the bit where it's like, oh my God, look what they can do to us.
But it does seem to be the only way that... So you mentioned there, long ball was not working. What are you going to do? You then have to start running the ball. You have to start getting the ball into maybe the middle third and get runners off the shoulder. But we see what happens then when you do that. So the traditional plan A or plan B, neither of those two things really work against Limerick, because they have answers to both of those things. And I think there's been a growing appreciation. And I think that Limerick's midfield is getting to the stage now where they've been called underrated so much that they are in danger of being overrated at some point. It seems that in every single game you've got William O'Donoghue and Darragh O'Donovan just being lauded, and rightly so. And it is players like that mean that when you are trying to run through the lines, you are absolutely shattered.
They were sensational.
They were absolutely sensational again. When you get within an arse's roar of the Limerick goal. So
here's the thing, right? As well, like at the match, it's very clear that in that final 20 minutes, that there appears to be a difference in the conditioning of the two teams, because Cork look like they're out on their feet. Now, I presume there isn't. I presume that at inter-county level, actually, all the teams are relatively close to being as fit as one another. I mean, am I wrong about that? You would assume that the science behind getting someone up to peak fitness, and like, you know, there's people with PhDs who are involved in building these strength and conditioning programs. It's just that the physical toll that it takes to play against Limerick is obviously so high that players who are fit are out on their feet because of what they have been put through. And that point that you're making about being put through the ringer for everything, because there was a point in the second half where actually the full forward line essentially had been subbed off, or it looked like Kingston and Horgan had been withdrawn, and there was 3 subs on, and they were hassling and harrying at the puck out. This is the Cork team late in the second half. Game's completely dead, so of course they are. And there was energy about that press that hadn't been there in the first half. But there was also a period in the second half where somebody won a ball out in front of us. We were at Laura Cusick in the Cork side, and he just needed a runner. He just needed someone to go inside him. But whoever it was just completely shattered, that they didn't have the energy left to go and create a bit of space. And at that point, you're in traffic and there's 3 Limerick lads around you. You get swallowed up and the ball gets cleared. So they were playing as individuals at that point, and I think they've been playing as individuals essentially since the 15th, 16th minute. But it did appear as if there was a difference in strength and conditioning, and that doesn't make any sense, right?
No, it doesn't. And if we want to talk about trying to not screw up a golden generation of players, and that needs to be the number one question that they ask themselves: is there actually a good enough programme there for the Cork young hurlers to turn into the monsters that the Limerick hurlers currently are on a physical level? Because that is now the base that you need to be at in order to be competitive at this level if you want to win any All-Irelands. And then you just got to hope that the talent holds up and they get even better and turn into brilliant hurlers at that level too. So I think really yesterday was almost vindication for people who might have rated Galway quite highly over the last few years, because they have been the team, other than Limerick, who've been comprised of man mountains all across the pitch, and that have been able to maybe go toe-to-toe physically with them and with other teams. And it is that sort of contender at the moment that looks like they'll be best placed to topple Limerick, whereas Cork maybe possibly, and I don't know, but like maybe they're the second best team in the country hurling wise, but physicality wise it doesn't look like they are. And it's interesting that you say that, having been at the game as well.
Sorry, last point on this, because we've got to move on, but you're right about the hurling. The skills deserted Cork yesterday. Their passing went to ground, their pickup was slow. Like, is that the occasion getting to the team? Is it just an uncertainty about their identity and what they're trying to do? They're the answers. They're the questions that if they get the answers to, they can make a quick comeback from this. But if they don't get the answers to it, and if there's doubt, and if there's, I don't know, it'll be very interesting to see what the winter is like in Cork after an All-Ireland performance like that. You would hope that management team stays intact and comes back and is able to absorb the lessons from what happened. But we know historically that's not always the case. After a beating like that, you get in trouble. Just a reminder, every Monday morning here on OTB AM, we give you the chance to win a Gillette starter pack. All you got to do to enter is get in touch with your suggestions for the performance rankings. Who do you think should make the good, the bad and the meh? Tweet us at OffTheBallAM, WhatsApp 0879 180 180, or enter on our Instagram stories. What's next?
Joe Mason has been in touch to say, lads, stop talking about Cork. It's all about Limerick performance. The players hit near perfection. This is the performance rankings where we do the bad, the grand, and then the good. So
did they hit near perfection? That's the other question. Like, so I think that they could. I think that they could improve in that performance. I actually think that the wides, you know, like, is Kyle Hayes going to miss many shots again? Probably not. I definitely think that they could get better. That's why I don't think this is their 08 performance. I think this is closer to the 07 performance, where there's still room for them to get better, and that's why I am shooing them in for next year's All-Ireland.
The other thing in the bad this morning in the red is the Nice fans. We'll just touch on this very quickly. If you missed this last night, Dimitri Payet was hit on the back of his head with a bottle from supporters, and the supporters probably weren't expecting justice to be meted out. Justice being Dimitri Payet picking up the bottle and throwing it back into the stands when all hell broke loose. The Nice fans essentially invade the pitch and a massive brawl breaks out. One of the Marseille assistant coaches wearing an orange bib rushes onto the pitch and decks one of the Nice supporters. You've got Jorge Sampaoli, who's the Marseille manager, utterly enraged by the whole thing. He's being held back by Payet, by other people involved in the camp as well. Furious that his players would be subjected to a projectile being thrown onto the pitch. This is not the first time that we've seen crowd trouble this season in a game involving Marseille this season. A couple of weeks ago on the opening night of the season, Marseille versus Montpellier had to be temporarily stopped due to missiles being thrown onto the pitch. This time though it went way further and the fans came onto the pitch and the game was abandoned rather than just being stopped temporarily. It was the fact that the Nice players came back onto the pitch and were willing to resume it, and then Marseille basically didn't show up for the resumption of the game. That led to it being called off, which usually leads to the team who didn't show up getting having to forfeit the game. But I would be astonished if that was actually the case. This was an just on Twitter last night, Kevin Kilban was tweeting about projectiles onto the pitch, and I'm not sure if you remember this. I certainly don't. The 2003 game against Georgia.
Oh yeah, knife.
Yeah, knife. And there was a 42 article shared as well, where he said, I was hit with a knife. It was funny at the time. Something just hit me on the shoulder. I looked down and it was an open flick knife, which I actually don't recall. And the Guardian's report of the game describes how Lee Carsley and Damien Duff were caught in the head by plastic bottles, and Gary Breen was hit by a ball bearing. Glass smashed against the frame of Shea Given's goal, and the bottle narrowly missed Gary Doherty after his late winner. It's something we see so often, where a player goes over to take a corner or something and there's just projectiles flying everywhere.
Yeah.
You can dig this out on social media. It looked like a bad old hit that Payet took in the back of the head, and you never want to enrage a fan group, but I can completely understand the fury that would be inside you to say, screw you, I'm throwing this plastic bottle back at you. And clearly the Nice fans just looking for a fight if they respond to that by running onto the pitch.
It's Marseille versus Montpellier and Nice versus Marseille. It's like these people living in this kind of island or Mediterranean paradise, and the pent-up anger coming from something or other. It's I just assumed that everybody on the Côte d'Azur would be, high in the hog of life, but it turns out that's not the case. It's 7:58. Let's go.
The hurling championship is in the grand. We've kind of touched on this already because you're making the point that all the other elite counties maybe are in a state of flux, or there is certainly questions to be asked about all of those other counties, and the only county with a real sense of certainty going into 2022 is Limerick, and that's a pretty scary prospect.
The parade yesterday was as exciting a moment as I've had at a sports match, because it really felt like there was going to be a classic unfolding. And when Shane Kingston's goal went in, the stadium rolled, because it was like, oh, this is great, you guys have scored an early goal, but we've got right back at you, and this is going to be a classic. And then as Limerick dominated, the Limerick crowd went absolutely feverish for that first half. But the second half atmosphere was pretty flat, because Limerick were essentially celebrating, and it was that kind of weird suspended animation where you're going to have a wild 24, 48, 7 weeks, however long it is that Limerick are going to celebrate, and they deserve to celebrate. But we do need uncertainty of outcome for things to be classics, and at the moment, I don't think there's any uncertainty of outcome. It's just saying that next year's hurling championship, we better be careful what we wish for. We need a rival. Limerick to be cemented as a truly all-time great team. I mean, they might do 5 in a row here, but they could do with a rival along the way, just to kind of have some classics where we get to see them put to the pin of their collar.
Yeah.
And look, maybe it is Tipperary. Maybe that's what's going to happen. They will go massively down in games and then they will beat you. And that game, when we come back to look at the history of this Limerick team in future years, is going to be the one where it's like, okay, and they are the rival for the next few years. And maybe, Liam Cahill takes that new team and it's his underage teams coming through to backbone that side, and it's a few of the older lads who have 2 or 3 All-Irelands in their back pocket who are peppered through that, as opposed to the other way around. And that's what we need to happen. So, but none of the rest of the contenders, I think, can live with that team. Eddie Brennan tweeted yesterday, thank God Kilkenny were bet in the semi-final. or was it Owen Larkin? Sorry, it was Owen Larkin tweeted that.
Interesting.
It is, isn't it? Like,
I think it's the final that a lot of us maybe would have wanted before the season. We wanted to see the rematch of 2019, but I think that they've just gone to another level since then, since COVID, and the 2020-2021, they've just been just ridiculously dominant. It is, like, there is nothing better. So the reason why it's in the amber, by the way, the Hurling Championship, is that, yes, you do have an all-time great team and we should enjoy this, but also it does diminish the entire competition. But there is nothing better in sport than seeing one of these all-time great teams getting pushed to the pin of their collar.
That's
and that goes for those Kilkenny Tip games and those Dublin Mayo games.
Exactly. They were the best games that we've ever seen.
So this could go from grand to the good if there is a proper contender over the next little while.
Yeah.
In the good, just to give a quick mention to Shane Duffy before we finish up on Limerick, he scored against Watford at the weekend and has had a pretty good start to the season, I think it's fair to say. The Ireland squad is getting announced on Thursday. Stephen Kenny was at the game, Brighton and Hove Albion game against Watford at the weekend, was chatting to himself and Aaron Connolly after the game.
Connolly came off the bench.
Connolly came off the bench and missed an absolute sitter. Like we could have been sitting here this morning. Maybe absolute sitter is a bit harsh on him, given the ball came to him at a bit of pace, but we could be sitting here this morning saying that there was 2 Irish goal scorers for the one team in the one game, and maybe that happens before the year is out, because Shane Duffy looks like his Republic of Ireland of old, where he is a really big goal threat. And there was another corner that came late in the game where you're like, Shane Duffy's going to score again here. From Kenny's perspective, Duffy is playing in the middle of a back three. From Ireland's perspective, by and large, the back three has been almost like the silver bullet for all our ills over the next little while, and all of a sudden Ireland's best centre back is looking like his old self, but playing in a system that actually could get the best of this current Ireland crop. So I'm optimistic, but Portugal is coming, and maybe worse than that, Azerbaijan and Serbia are coming. So Ireland squad announced Thursday. Shane Duffy very much in the green, and brilliant to see him back playing so well. The good, and I mean, it's going to be Limerick hour now for the next little while. We've spoken a lot about them at the top of the show already, but there really aren't enough great things you can say about this Limerick team when it comes to the bunch of players that they have and also the management that they have. I don't think many of us expected the Kilkenny greatness to be matched so soon after that great Kilkenny team. Like you mentioned there, we're still talking about the dismantling of that team to a certain degree. There are still the very last wisps of that team still hanging around, and of course Cody's still going, but to see a team I would say match what they're doing and possibly even surpass it over the next little while is absolutely extraordinary. And I mean, we've spoken about the Limerick edge and what they bring to proceedings that makes them winners. At the same time, when you listen to someone like John Kiley speak after the game, you just feel thoroughly delighted for the man. He just seems like just a really, really good human being. And the Limerick players obviously are blessed by the fact that they are so talented and are so brilliant, but I think they're extra fortunate to have him as a leader, like steering the ship in the right direction, and all the different people he's brought around him, which just makes this beyond the benchmark that everybody must reach.
Yeah, sensational performance. 41 points, 332 in an All-Ireland final. They are the greatest at the moment, and they have the potential to be the greatest team of all time if things don't derail them, and that's a conversation we're going to be having in just a couple of minutes' time with James Scale. If you've got views on Limerick, let's hear them. 0879 180 180 is the WhatsApp number. Of course, you can always get us on the YouTube stream, which is probably the best place for people to watch us these days, and of course you can tweet us at Off the Ball AM as well. It is this week's performance rankings in the bag.
OTB AM's performance rankings with Gillette.
Right, we're going to take a quick break and we're going to be back with Hurling with James Scale next.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station.